Branka, let's start with you. One of the things you talked about that piqued my attention was the notion of upskilling. We're hearing that over and over from Department of Education, Department of Labor, in terms of workforce investment. What are your thoughts on upskilling, and whose responsibility is that? Is it the employer, or is it colleges, or how can we best make sure jobs are changing so rapidly? How do we address upskilling?
Thank you, Greg. It's a tough question. So upskilling, we all know that it's necessary because processes, models, and products are changing, and good talented workers need to be taken along that path. Whose responsibility, who pays for it, and when do you do it? When people are so busy that they literally don't have time at all to go back to classrooms. So I would say that we need to think micro-learning and micro-credentialing for construction. We need to think product line-based certifications versus job role certifications. And we need to think about associating dollars, not necessarily with schools, but with individuals, something that in some countries have as individual training accounts where people can be lifelong learners and take money out of these accounts at different times to upgrade their skills and move in their career pathways. So that's one thing. On the other side is, how do we dynamically change what is being taught in schools and different training programs to be aligned with what industry needs? And it used to be these councils, employer councils, but they're not very efficient. They're not the right model for today's environment, because people, again, those businesses and employers are very busy and they cannot afford to sit for hours or days in some discussion forums. The pace that education curricula changes and all the approvals that need to happen is not the pace at which there are improvements in the industry. So we need to think about modular, where there is a role for education institutions where they provide some basic knowledge and some principles and ability to learn. And then there are other ways that we can provide technology, we leverage technology and we use it to provide on-site, on-demand learning. So I think that's where innovation in education can really drive the outcomes.
Thank you. Really appreciate that. Mark, your background I think is very interesting. You have both the industry experience for years and educator. I was just recently at a conference. There were 150 executive directors of home building associations, and something you touched on that they were all trying to solve that. It's that mentality obstacle of this new generation we're trying to bring in. I think the recent stats showed that the under 25 population is growing in the construction area, and the 55 plus people retiring is also growing. Can you talk about any successes you've seen in terms of just breakthroughs or champions with that mentality obstacle that we have in the industry?
Actually, yeah, I have a great one, or maybe two. This started 4 years ago. Is Jefferson County here in Colorado, and specifically Wheat Ridge High School, is they realized, we are failing at especially our underserved students. I hate the term, they call them the at-risk student. And they started a program called Career Explore. And this program, it has evolved. So when it first started, I had 4 students. They were all on their way out of high school, in not the sense of graduation, but either being kicked out or quitting. And they started the program with us in Colorado Homebuilding Academy. We kind of created it and evolved it as it went. And now 4 years later, that same program is not just for the at risk of leaving high school. It has been open to all students. Anybody that is interested in learning, not just construction, they do construction, hospitality, and medicine, but mine is the construction, is they've opened the doors. They've changed the culture, the outlook of what construction was. And they have been fantastic at that is that, and one of the things they work very closely with us is what we realized was the counselors that are counseling these young people had no idea how many careers were in construction. Everybody hears construction and they tend to think hammer and nails, the guy in the field, in the mud, getting dirty. And it was one of the things that I found as our greatest trial was getting the counselors that are counseling these students on what they're doing after high school to understand the pure number of careers in construction and how really the majority of them, you don't pick up a hammer. You're not in the field. That's actually the small part of construction. So they're ones that are amazing innovation. That program now is actually spread across Jefferson County. There's 3 high schools directly involved with Career Explorer. And the last conference I was at with them, there was 12 schools that were doing a version of careers in construction, getting away from that old mentality of the woodworking shop and moving more towards a career in construction. So wonderful stuff happening there. And there's another one, and this Tyler brought this up, and I kind of like, hey, I know somebody doing that. It's actually Colorado Homebuilding Academy has started a satellite campus in the Springs. And we have actually just been finalizing the foster children that are coming out of the system, where they've just sort of, okay, you're 18 now, goodbye. We're showing them pathways into construction. We actually have them coming into boot camps. And we're also working and almost finished with this one. Anybody that deals with the government red tape will understand how it can be very frustrating, but it looks like we're gonna have a contract in place with parolees. And these two I find is very interesting on the innovation side of things. A lot of time these are folks that have given up. And once they see the pathway and the potential, it's amazing the thoughts and work ethic that they bring into construction. I think that's what I see with all of these programs that I'm talking about is these are people that see construction as not a job, it's a career. And it's a career that if they're willing to continue their learning on their own, because they understand, as we know, it's tough to, one, have the time, tough to afford. But if they're willing to sacrifice the innovation they're bringing in, the thought process they're bringing into construction is amazing.
Thank you. Yeah, Mark, Colorado is definitely a model state. Thank you for all you do. I'm familiar with your academy and how you all work together in Colorado. Tyler, you mentioned a little bit about just equity and representation. We all read the reports, how if you have a more diverse team, it drives innovation, it drives the bottom line. I think the recent Bureau of Labor Statistics, we're still stuck at about 10% women, 7% people of color, 3%, Asian in construction. In your mind, what do you see as some innovative ways to increase equity and representation in industry?
That's another big question. Just to lightly reinforce, what I started with of find and learn from organizations whose principal goal is that. I think taking advantage of existing efforts and existing strategies is one thing we've not yet learned to do. But also I think the baseline of having a more diverse workforce results in more innovation. I think the reverse has also seemed to be true. I don't have a lot of research, but I do have a lot of anecdotal evidence to support this, that like innovative approaches have also seemed to attract a more diverse workforce. And in this sense, I think the offsite construction world, so factories dedicated to housing production, anecdotally again, but outside the US and in the US, I've seen like measurably higher representation of women in the workforce, of people of color in the workforce, in a way that wasn't even an intentional goal of some of these factories producing housing, but is seemingly endemic to the environment of factory production, both culturally and physically. I think the ability to make every individual task related to assembling a module, for example, actually human scale and not depend on some gargantuan physical feat or ability to reach up higher than 6 feet in the air, suddenly brings the work literally down to the ground level in a way that makes it more physically and immediately accessible to a wider section of the actual population we're trying to recruit. And so minor ways, I think, of just changing the way we're doing things, even in physical or rote manner, are showing that they kind of seem to naturally attract the sort of broader workforce that we're hoping to get involved. Talent force. Getting better, Branka. One day it'll be intuitive.
Thank you. That's a great point. Innovative approaches really does change the culture and it attracts a different group. Mitch, you want to talk a little bit about Tricor, just some fun futurist trends that you're predicting are coming, perhaps in housing and products. You talked a little bit about build for rent, but is there anything on the horizon that you want to touch on?
Yeah, for sure. And I think everyone said it great, where it's when we change our image as an industry, it's amazing what that can do for how the perception of our industry is treated. Versus a guy, swinging a hammer, there's 15 diversified people standing up there that all have different jobs that are all contributing to what makes up a project. And so the way we've really structured our company is to be that. So, we handle everything from land acquisition through kind of the financial underwriting of projects, to site planning in-house, to product design, to integrating it into actual projects and seeing the benefits of alternative building practices, whether it's in speed, whether it's in reduced dumpsters, lower debt fees because we're going through the project faster. We always look at kind of the sticks and bricks numbers of a lot of different things, and the reality is there's so many more cost savings that are not focused on inside of how people review these projects and return basis as well. So all of that, plus then managing and overseeing all the construction. So, you kind of look at it as this, we try to set ourselves up as this kind of smaller segment that's just getting legs and trying to be kind of a turnkey solution inside of that. And it's allowed us to really, open up the doors to a lot of people that say, hey, I have a lot of interesting products here that we think could work great inside of your space, because it's viewed differently than maybe me trying to upsell an energy efficient house to the prospective home buyers, and they got to pay 30% more for it. It's actually just a standard feature. And because I'm dealing with maybe an investor now at this point, they care a lot more about the longevity of the product, and maybe alternative revenue streams than anything else. So it says, hey, I'd rather have, R30 insulation throughout the entire house, and, my HVAC doesn't need to work as hard, and I can, work in better products and better windows, and all of this kind of snowball effect that happens when you really start way back in the process and kind of bring that to the fold. And you can see it trickle all the way down to the subcontractors itself, because they start seeing that I can gain a lot of efficiencies through this too. My 4-man crew that used to actually have to be 12 can now do the same input or same output as that crew of 12 that was doing. And now all of a sudden, because we've evolved with the products, our people have evolved with it, and they've learned to act and look at things differently. And it just is this snowball effect through the installation side as well. So, we've tried all sorts of different products and testers throughout this thing. And, when we were all meeting earlier this week, it was kind of like, one of the positives that came out of, of this whole pandemic is that, you did see lumber skyrocket, and you see how fragile the supply chain is. And people are really starting to say, we need to do something different here. We need to protect ourselves. If we're going to invest this much money, we need to, to really figure out a way to try to hedge against it. And it's through utilizing things that are not typical, which is it's a good, exciting time, because over the last 4 years of pushing for this stuff, it's been quite a few roadblocks along the way to get these things going. So
thank you. I think we have about 5 minutes before we bring in the audience in and start answering some of the questions that you might have. So make sure you're thinking of those and putting those in the chat function. So now we would just really want to get some crosstalk going, so as many panelists can answer. And let's start with, how do we free people to think differently and progressively about home delivery?
I love what Mark said. Where I was kind of like, just change this image. It's once again, I feel the same way. It's like our perception is so singular minded right now in terms of how we view construction. It's like that word is used. It's just construction. It's like that the industry of real estate really is what we're talking about here across everything. And so showing how many different segments are with that and putting people in place that understand how each one of those interact together is a huge piece to changing what the outcome is at the end of the day, and how we get innovative products to scale and produce affordable, obtainable, houses at the end of the day.
And also we need to empower people and educate them to be creative. So how many construction programs actually teach creativity, or how many of them focus on transferable skills that are beyond specific trade curriculum or certificate of accomplishment for a certain job role. So thinking about digital skills, thinking about soft skills that help people move their careers. If radical innovation is going to produce also unemployment, technological unemployment, because jobs will be displaced. We have also a responsibility to think forward and future-proof the workforce, and think about where are these workers going to be? What is dynamic workforce planning in a certain region? And how do we equip people with enough accountability and ability to build their own careers while they're building homes?
I would also just add, in trying to decide how to phrase it, but maybe like a problem-centered approach. I think especially high school students that I've worked with and tried to teach, hopefully successfully, the idea that they're being presented with dozens of opportunities that are all supposed to be really appealing for XYZ reasons can get really overwhelming. But most even teenagers in high school have things they've come to care about, be it homelessness, climate change is an obvious one, and a lot of other topics that are irrepressibly, inexorably, I don't know, a big word to say, definitely related to the major problems that a lot of us tend to care about. And when choosing a career, I think there's a lot of still increasing tendency to go towards something that will find fulfillment. And basically any role you could pursue within the built environment industry, including real estate, beyond real estate, can directly contribute to a lot of the problems that millennials, I think, especially tend to drive towards. And so leading with like construction can be a way to directly address the problem and opportunities presented by climate change and homelessness and socioeconomic inequalities, is a way to tie it with the things we already care about, and not just focus on like labor supply is low, which is a little bit too abstract, I think, for a lot of us making career decisions still.
Excellent. Do we have time for one more question, Betsy, or one?
Yep. Okay. Oh yeah, you do. You're good.
Okay. All right. How do we ensure there's a big picture view on sustainability beyond just energy efficiency?
So Sustainability, I think in home building, most people think of environmental sustainability, but I think we need to put also a very strong highlight on social sustainability and what does it mean for a workforce. So there was a study, I think University of Chicago did it, of what are the 7 characteristics of sustainable workforce in construction. And some of them are, we will all name, like well-trained and diverse and inclusive and safe and healthy and valued well. But I think that there are 2 specifically that we're not focused. One is that resilience of workforce to changes and shifts, technological, economic, and all other disruptions. And the other one is engaged. Somebody mentioned that we have a lot of very old people in construction that are aging out and leaving. Knowledge is leaving out. And then we have some young people entering the industry, possibly in entry-level positions, which they're not carrying that kind of experience. So we have a middle that's missing, and we are losing a lot of people. I mean, anecdotally, we're losing 3 out of 4. So our retention is not very good, and we need to really focus on how to keep people in the industry. So one of the action items that we have going forward before the end of the year, Building Talent Foundation is partnering with Oxford Center for Employee Engagement to actually study why people stay in the industry and why are they thinking about leaving. We need to understand the reasons behind lack of this engagement so that we can possibly address. And there's no way to drive innovation, if you don't have that middle that has the knowledge and really stays and it's engaged and valued by the industry.
I'm with you, Branka, and it's funny because what our industry is up against is other industries, and what they see is, maybe a slide from the 3rd floor down to, the snack section of the office that I work in, and that seems appealing because it looks fun and it's, social and it's a great environment. But at the end of the day, those guys are working 14 hours sitting in front of a desk, and that's what it is. And so, what we have to offer is something that is so diverse in terms of whether it's the products that we're working with and robots and BIM and, GPS and drones and, integrating all 3 of these together in the manufacturing processes and actually physically seeing these products come alive through an installation and turn into something that someone can use for the next 50 years is an amazing thing. It's why I was drawn to the industry to begin with, because you actually see physical progress happening on a day-to-day basis. Every morning you get there, and at the end of every day, there's something new that happened, on a good day. But that's such a cool thing to have. And I think if that's the perception that we put out there, is that this is what real estate and construction and manufacturing and all these different entities that we work with, is in reality. It's amazing probably what the retention rate ends up being, the progression that ends up happening, and the adoption that we end up having to kind of meet this idea of trying to utilize one of the biggest contributors to resource use in the construction industry to something that is, a lot more sustainable and useful.
Betsy, you're muted.
I was trying to be quiet and make sure my dogs weren't barking in the background the whole time. If we've got any other responses to that before we jump into a couple of questions, if you're attending, feel free to jump into the chat. Make sure that you change the drop-down menu from hosts and panelists to everyone, to share it with everyone. We do have a couple of comments in here that we'll go to, and then as you're thinking, Greg will also jump in with some other questions that he's got as well. But the first one that we have says, how can the agencies having jurisdiction code officials be brought in to accept new learning and application to home building? So how can you engage codes in the education process, or code officials, excuse me?
It's definitely a big one. I'll use experience. I'll let everyone jump in with it. But you know, we recently just submitted for building plans on a new building product in the city of Tempe, which is kind of inside of Arizona, where ASU is, and the city itself is super progressive in the way that they look at things and the buildings that they're bringing, and you know, the campus is right there, and ASU's got a great construction program. And so, you know, what we did is we, inside of a permanent application that we had to go through, we actually brought in the manufacturing team with us to help kind of pitch the product, because who knows it better than the manufacturer itself. And it helped us in our zoning case to get through. They actually applauded us for bringing new products in. Then inversely, as we go to submit everything, the building department sees it completely differently, right? And it's a liability, to kind of Tyler's point of saying, you know, why is everything always looked at as, you know, the roadblocks are, I don't want to take this liability, rather than trying to solve the problem with us. And so, you know, we're back in that same thing where it's, you know, manufacturers involved, and we're trying to work through these details, and no one wants to take the risk. And it's just this kind of ever evolving process that happens. But now behind it is 4 more projects using the exact same material. So now the city needs to sit there and say, okay, we need to do something about this, or the change that we're asking for isn't going to come here because we're not accepting it. And so they've actually now stepped forward to say that we're gonna start changing our code process, and we'll make some amendments along the way to help you guys out. But you know, we're going to actually go through this to put ourselves in a better position to be inviting to manufacturers like this. So, you know, it's kind of a long-winded thing of saying, like, you just got to try. You know, you got to try. You got to adopt it. You got to go for it, and bring the team with you along the way. And if you make enough noise and bring enough, you know, to the forefront in terms of what a city is missing out on, when they're the ones promoting that they want to have this, that, you know, things will change. It just is, you know, some headaches along the way.
I think I can at least speak for the state of California. There's been a lot of state leadership on this topic. So the Department of Housing and Community Development in California has a super explicit role in offsite construction, in that they actually do factory-based inspection of the homes, including if they're produced outside of state or country, before they go to the project site in California. So there's this division of scope that makes the state very involved in projects using offsite construction for housing, and is supposed to be able to take some of the scope of work outside of the function of the local jurisdiction and code official. The same problems that Mitch just described in terms of concerns over liability sometimes make that division unclear, and the local code official inspects what they're not supposed to inspect, or do overlap and create extra work and delays. But the state, I think, is trying to take a more active role in proactively training and engaging with local officials, and using locally based factory producers, housing producers, to make that conversation happen. So actually just going out and inviting whatever code official wants to join in a factory tour, and spending 1 or 2 hours explaining the process, showing them the actual assembly process, showing how sophisticated it is, how quality control is a lot easier to do than a typical on-site project, and both giving them the confidence where they're not as concerned about the liability, but also just opening the dialogue with the state to see how much rigor the state inspection process does go through before giving the HCD or California stamp on the unit before it leaves the factory. And I think that engaging the local official before they're actually needed, and just showing them, exposing them to the process, having them involved in the conversation and aware of what is actually taking place in the factory and inspection process at the state level, has done wonders for the project teams I've talked to that have tried that out, and had a lot more open conversation and a lot less friction with local officials by the time the units actually hit the ground.
We have another question here that's great. It's actually talking about a barrier with the technological advancements. So with all these technological advancements, will they be a problem for the overall economies of the industry? Wages remain low because land costs can be high, adding technology to the cost would not necessarily benefit the talent costs, excuse me, Branka. What insights do you all have as to how to increase wages and still keep costs down to make the overall numbers work for developers and for the industry? Any thoughts on that front?
I would just say it's looking at more than just the wage costs itself, right? There's a lot of different costs that go into what makes up a total project. So, if we're looking at a $65 million 400 unit townhome deal that we have, what makes up the construction costs of that is it's a big chunk, but it's not all of it. And so how do you attack the other sections to help offset, to say that I can maybe increase my wages a little bit because I know that I just had 95% less dumpsters out there, or I just cut off 6 months of schedule, which means my soft costs of my people, the indirect cost of the project, whether it's temp fence and SWIP and inspections, and then cost of money and insurance. All these things start getting kind of chipped away at a little bit. And in some projects we've looked at, we've carved out millions of dollars just because of that type of situation. And so now can we offer incentives maybe to our subcontractor groups to say, get this thing done a little bit earlier, and there's kind of that cash prize at the end, which it's amazing the motivation that happens when you start taking that approach versus, you go $1 over and I'm going to charge you $2 for it kind of type mentality. And so there's more ways to dice it up than just saying, how do I cut labor costs, rather than saying there's other areas to find the money. Let's use that money to actually offset against and incentivize people to get to the end goal, because that's what we're all after anyways.
There is a simple math solution. So if the construction industry now needs 400,000 people, let's say at an average cost, and if technology helps that we need 1 out of 2, so we can reduce the need for talent in terms of pure numbers, but they need to be more sophisticated people. So then that means the wage can increase twice and still not impact the total cost of talent. It's a very simple equation.
Well, and I'll speak as a small construction company of where it's tough to get talent sometimes because we can't always pay what others, but what I have found, and this goes back to that training, that educating the small construction company, is bringing in innovation. A lot of times for me equates to, as Tyler or as Zach said, is our costs are down in other ways, which allows me to actually increase the wages of my people. So and Branka said, it's actually very simple math sometimes. Are there times where my profit drops a little bit while we're in the learning curve? Yes, but we have to look beyond just tomorrow. We were talking about sustainability, and in the long run, I am finding that innovation actually allows me to increase the wages of my people on site.
And I'll just add lastly, is the academic voice of nuance and caveats, is that it's important to emphasize that offsite construction, but also a lot of construction innovation broadly, isn't always applicable to every project and especially every geography. Wage labor costs vary significantly across the country. In San Francisco Bay Area, labor costs are actually really high and a significant contributor to the high cost of construction here. It's not a coincidence that this and Los Angeles region with somewhat similar but less extreme problems in Southern California are the major aggregators of offsite products, both from within the state, outside the state, and outside the country. And so it's important to recognize that even where those dynamics and that simple math does definitely apply, on the regional scale and depending on the geographic factors, it definitely changes the calculus quite a bit. And so it's not a one size fits all solution is the really unoriginal way to say that, but it's important to keep in mind.
Well, thank you everyone for your input. Thanks, Greg, for facilitating the conversation. We're coming to the close of the hour. I just wanted to give you guys a Refresher on kind of where we're headed next. There was some great conversation here. We're going to continue with more snapshots and more Q&A with the next group of people. You'll find over the course of these 2 days, there's some overlap and some interesting connections between each of the areas. I know that there's some overlap with some of your questions that you'll get some other perspectives on, even in the tee-ups in the next session. So join us at 1:15. Just click again on that join button on your on the event webpage to join us. It's going to be another webinar format. You'll enter questions in the Q&A field as well. But we're also going to regroup at 2:15 Eastern time, all Eastern time, this afternoon for working groups. So there's an opportunity on that same agenda to at 2:15 or whatever the time is in your market, click on the join button for either education or behavioral factors and biases for a more open discussion in a Zoom meeting format. And many of the panelists, both from this session and from the next session, will be attending that and part of those discussions as well. And we have some new facilitators that will be heading up those discussions, but you guys will be the star of that. So come and bring your ideas, any inspiration you had from this session, any that you have from the next, to join us at 2:15. But again, thank you so much on behalf of myself, the Alliance, RNN, and HUD for being such a great first panel over the course of these couple of days. And we'll see you guys again online in about 15 minutes for the next panel discussion.